Hello, my dear listener. Where in the world are you tonight? Is the air around you quiet? Can you hear the hum of the night? Maybe the wind? Maybe the river beneath your window? Wherever you are, breathe slowly and come with me now to the ancient land where the sand remembers the footsteps of queens, to a time when the Nile was young and the stars still whispered to the stones. This is the story of Hatshepsut, the daughter of Amun, the woman who became Pharaoh, and the falcon who learned to fly beyond time. Let the sound of her voice carry you into the stillness of ancient Egypt, where temples dreamed and eternity wore the scent of myrrh. Now, close your eyes. We begin. Do you hear it, my listener? That low, endless murmur that never fades, the breath of the Nile beneath the dawn. Even now, across the centuries, I can still hear it, the sound that cradled my first heartbeat. I was born not to silence, but to water. The river was my lullaby, its pulse my first prayer. They said the day of my birth was radiant, a morning brushed in gold and pale rose. Thebes shimmered beneath the sun, and the lotus flowers opened their sleepy eyes to greet it. From the temple of Amun came the faint ringing of bronze bells, soft and clear like distant laughter. The air smelled of honey and blue lotus, and doves circled slowly over the courtyards of the palace. My mother, Ahmose, whispered later that the god himself had visited her before my birth. Amun had appeared in a dream, she said, cloaked in light, his breath carrying the scent of cedar and storm. He had spoken my name before I was born, Hatshepsut, foremost of noble women. His words, she said, felt like wind across the desert, shaping something invisible into being. When she awoke, she touched her belly and knew the gods had already written my story. But tell me, my listener, have you ever wondered what it means to be born into destiny? It sounds like a gift, doesn't it? Yet it is a cage woven from sunlight and shadow. The world celebrates your name, but you are never free to choose who you will become. I grew beneath ceilings painted with stars. The walls of my father's palace were cool and smooth, their carvings alive with the faces of gods who watched in silence. The scent of incense drifted through the corridors, mingling with the salt of the river wind. When I was small, I would press my palms to the limestone walls and feel the heartbeat of Egypt within them, steady, ancient, patient. My father, Thutmose I, was a man of strength and laughter. He carried himself like a lion, proud and golden beneath the sun. When he entered a room, the courtiers bowed so low that the tips of their crowns touched the floor. He would lift me into his arms, his bracelets cool against my skin, and his voice deep as thunder would rumble with stories of conquest. There is nothing more sacred than the land of Kemet, he told me once. It is the skin of the gods themselves. Guard it with your heart, my little hawk. He called me that his little hawk, and I would smile, though inside I was already learning that hawks, too, are caged when born in palaces. There were days I wandered through the courtyards with my nursemaids trailing behind, their linen gowns whispering over the stones. The sunlight would filter through the columns, dappling my face with gold. From the gardens came the hum of bees among the papyrus blossoms, and the air shimmered with heat. The palace cats, sleek and silent, wound between my legs as if guarding me from unseen things. At night, when sleep would not come, I would sneak to the terraces that overlooked the Nile. The moon lay upon the water like a silver mirror, and the reeds swayed softly, whispering secrets in the dark. Sometimes, when the breeze brushed my cheek, I would whisper to the river, "Do you see me, great Nile? Do you know who I will become?" The river never answered, not in words, but once, when I was 7, a heron rose from the reeds, its wings gleaming in the moonlight, and for a heartbeat I thought it bowed. That night I dreamed of a voice neither male nor female, older than sand, softer than wind. It said only, "I see you," and when I awoke, my heart beat with a strange calm, as though something vast and invisible had touched it. From that day on, I began to listen, truly listen, not just with my ears, but with my breath, my skin, my bones. I listened to the murmurs of the priests chanting in the dawn, to the flutter of palm leaves in the wind, to the whispers that sometimes passed through my dreams. In their quietness, I began to learn that power speaks softly before it roars. My mother was gentle, her beauty serene as still water. She would braid my hair in the mornings, her fingers smelling faintly of frankincense. Her eyes were pools of gold and shadow, and when she looked at me, I felt both love and distance, as though part of her already belonged to the divine. She often said, "We women are the thread between worlds, my daughter. We carry the gods in silence." I did not understand her then, but later I would. For silence, I would learn, is its own kind of crown. The palace of Thebes was full of lessons. I learned the language of stars, how to measure the floods of the Nile by the tilt of the moon. I learned to speak the hymns of Amun, each word a key that unlocked the rhythm of the universe. The priest said I had a gift that when I spoke, the lamps burned brighter. But what did I care for praise? I was a child yearning to understand why my heart ached when I looked upon the horizon. Perhaps you, too, know that feeling, that ache without name, that longing for something just beyond sight. It is the beginning of destiny. One afternoon, while the sun burned low and the shadows stretched long, I wandered into the temple courtyard. The air was thick with incense, golden in the light. The great statue of Amun loomed above me, the hidden one, his face calm and unknowable. I bowed, a small figure before his vastness, and whispered, "If you are my father, show me." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the air shifted. A breeze stirred, though there was no wind, and the torches flickered. Somewhere behind me, a priest gasped, and I heard it again, that voice, faint as breath, deep as eternity. "You are my daughter." I fell to my knees. The world around me blurred light, sound, form, until all that remained was that voice within me, steady and warm, filling the hollow spaces of my heart. That was the night I ceased to be a child. That was the night the falcon within me opened its wings. Years passed as the river turned slow, inevitable, carrying everything toward the sea. I grew tall, my limbs long and strong from riding and ceremony, my face shaped by the desert sun. The court began to watch me differently, no longer as a girl, but as a vessel of purpose. When I entered the hall, the murmurs ceased. When I spoke, the scribes took note. And though I still smiled, I learned that smiles can be armor. Even then, I understood. The gods were not done with me. Something vast was moving beneath the surface of my life, like the current beneath the Nile, unseen but unstoppable. Sometimes I wonder, my listener, if you can feel such things too, the slow turning of fate beneath the quiet hours of your days. If you can, do not fear it. It means the gods are near. For I was once a child, standing by the river, asking who I was meant to become. And the river, patient and eternal, already knew the answer. Do you still hear me, my listener? Then come walk with me again through the golden corridors of my youth. The walls still glow with light. The scent of blue lotus still lingers in the air. It is here that my childhood began to dissolve like dew beneath the morning sun. I was 15, perhaps 16, when the council spoke the words that would change the course of my life. Hatshepsut shall wed Thutmose, son of the king, blood of her father. No one asked if I wished it. In palaces, questions are for the weak. The gods had decided, or so the priest said, and I was to obey. Such is the way of royal daughters. We are born not for ourselves, but for the balance of dynasties. Thutmose was my half-brother, son of my father and a lesser wife. I remember him well, quiet, thoughtful, distant. There was a sadness to him, or perhaps a restraint, as though his own spirit was trapped within duty's cage. His eyes were dark and heavy-lidded, and when he smiled, it was like a shadow moving across stone, brief, almost apologetic. On the day of our marriage, Thebes glittered as though the sun itself had descended to bless us. The streets were strewn with petals of papyrus and myrrh. The people cheered, but their voices sounded far away, muffled by the roar of my own heartbeat. Priests in white linen stood in 2 long rows, their arms raised, their chants rising and falling like the tide. The air was thick with incense, gold and smoke and heat, and the temple bells trembled as the ceremony began. I stood before Thutmose in the sanctuary of Amun, the air shimmering with divine presence. My hands were painted in henna, my wrists heavy with gold, the weight of the crown pressed against my temples. The jewels burned like sunlight on my skin. When the priest tied the sacred knot around our wrists, I looked up and met Thutmose's gaze. His face was unreadable, calm, controlled, like the surface of a still pool. The gods bind you, the high priest declared, so that Egypt may remain eternal. I bowed my head, but inside, I wondered whether eternity could feel so much like silence. That night, the celebration roared through the palace. The halls glittered with torches, dancers spun like flames, and music rose from harps and drums until the very air seemed alive. I smiled as I was expected to smile. I greeted the nobles, accepted their blessings, and spoke the words of joy that queens are taught to speak. But when the music faded and the courtiers withdrew, I felt the loneliness settle like dust around me. Marriage in Egypt was not a union of hearts. It was a covenant between gods and bloodlines, sacred, binding, and often cold. I did not resent Thutmose. He was as much a prisoner as I. In his presence, I sensed the same quiet hunger that lived in me, a wish for something greater than obedience. Sometimes he would walk with me through the palace gardens at dusk. We spoke of the Nile, of the stars, of the way the papyrus swayed in the wind. He was kind in his way, but distant, as though he spoke from behind an invisible veil. When I asked him once if he ever felt the gods near, he smiled faintly and said, "I feel them watching, but not listening." I understood that too well. In those early years, I wore my crown lightly and my silence with grace. The court expected gentleness, humility, the quiet shadow of a king, and so I gave them what they desired. But within me, another voice stirred, calm, certain, patient. It was the same voice that had whispered my name when I was a child by the river. It said, You were not born to follow. I tried to ignore it at first. Yet the more I looked at the throne, gleaming beneath the torchlight, the more I felt it, that pull, that knowing. When Thutmose presided over council meetings, I would sit behind the lattice screens, listening. The generals spoke of conquest, the priests of omens, the scribes of trade and taxation. I learned their rhythms when they lied, when they hesitated, when fear trembled beneath their words. I began to see how power moved, not as a flood, but as a current beneath calm waters. And I thought, perhaps I too can learn to navigate that river. One morning, while Thutmose was away inspecting the granaries, a delegation from the priests of Karnak came to seek guidance. They brought scrolls of prophecy, asking whether the new shrines to Amun should be raised in the north or the south. Thutmose's absence left them uncertain, and so they came to me. I listened in silence, the papyrus crackling softly between my fingers, and when I spoke, my voice was calm, almost careless. Build where the sun first touches the horizon. Amun's light should greet the day before it greets the night. They bowed low, and the matter was settled. That evening, the high priest himself came to thank me. "The god speaks through you, my lady," he said, and I smiled. "He speaks through all who listen." It was a small thing, a single choice in a single morning, but it changed everything. From that day on, the priests began to seek me out more often. They said my words carried harmony, that I saw balance where others saw chaos. They began to call me the voice beneath the throne. Thutmose did not protest. Perhaps he was relieved to let me shoulder the burden of decisions. Or perhaps he simply did not see the path that was unfolding beneath our feet. I did not need to take his power. It was already flowing toward me, like the river to the sea. At dusk, I would go to the terrace overlooking the Nile. The wind would rise, carrying the scent of lotus and stone, and the temple bells would echo faintly across the water. Sometimes I would whisper to the air, "Great Amun, I do not seek the throne. I seek your order, your ma'at." And the wind would answer, gentle as breath, "Then rule, my daughter, and keep it." There were nights when I dreamt of a falcon soaring high above the desert, its wings cut through the sky like the blade of sunlight itself. When I awoke, I always felt that the falcon had been me not in body, but in spirit. A creature born to rise, though the earth would rather it stay bound. The years passed, and I learned the art of stillness of ruling without seeming to rule. I became the calm within the storm, the unseen compass of Egypt's heart. And yet, deep within, I knew the storm would come. Thutmose grew older, more tired, his eyes dulled by the weight of the crown. He was not cruel, he was simply fading. The gods had marked him for mortality, and I was still listening to eternity. When the day came that he fell ill, the palace grew silent as a tomb. The corridors smelled of oil and smoke. The servants moved like ghosts. I sat beside his bed, my hand resting upon his, and for the first time I saw him not as king, not as husband, but as a soul-weary, human, fragile. He whispered, "You are stronger than I, Hatshepsut. Promise me you will guide the boy." I nodded, though my throat ached with tears. "I promise." And when his breath left him, the torches in the chamber flickered as if the air itself had exhaled. Outside, the river continued to flow, indifferent and eternal. They said his son, the child Thutmose III, would inherit the throne. They said I would rule as regent until he came of age, and I bowed before the court as a widow should. But inside me, something vast and ancient awakened. The same voice, steady and quiet as ever, whispered once more. Now, my daughter, rise. When Thutmose's breath left his body, Egypt held its silence. The priests wrapped him in linen, chanting low, their voices trembling like wind across hollow reeds. Outside, the air was heavy, the colour of ash and gold. Even the river slowed its pulse, as if the gods themselves paused to watch. They said I would rule until the boy came of age, Thutmose III, son of another woman, heir by blood, but not by wisdom. He was small then, fragile as a sapling in the desert wind. When I first saw him standing in the throne room, his eyes wide beneath the crown, my heart ached with a strange tenderness. He was both child and burden, destiny and delay. The council bowed before me and murmured the words of ritual obedience. You will act in his name, O great wife of the king, until he is strong enough to rule. Their eyes, however, said something else. Until he is strong enough to replace you. I bowed in return, my veil brushing the cool stone floor. As the gods will it, I said aloud, but in my heart I whispered, as I will it. From that day forward, I learned to move within silence, as easily as I once moved within light. Power, I discovered, is not taken, it is grown. Like a lotus rising unseen beneath the water until one day it blooms. Each dawn, I walked barefoot to the temple of Amun. The morning mist curled around the columns like breath. The sky glowed faintly pink. The priests greeted me with murmurs and lowered eyes. They poured milk and honey upon the altar, and I lifted my hands to the hidden god. Father Amun, I prayed, I am your daughter. Let me keep Egypt in balance until your will is known. And in the silence, I felt him answer not with thunder, but with calm. A single ray of sunlight broke through the temple roof, touching my face, and I knew I was being seen. From that moment, Egypt began to bend toward me like reeds in the wind. The generals came seeking counsel, the merchants asked my permission to trade, and the scribes waited for my seal before recording any royal decree. They said they acted for the boy king, but it was my word they awaited. The people saw my image beside his on temple walls, and they began to bow to both. Yet when they whispered my name, they did so softly, as though it were still sacred. I became the regent, the silent ruler, the still point in the turning world. I learned to watch without speaking, to measure the hearts of men not by their words, but by the tremor of their eyes. In council, I let the others speak first, let their voices tangle like reeds in the current, and only then did I part the water with one clear sentence. Even the high priest would nod and say, the goddess Ma'at speaks through our queen. At night, when the stars burned white above the desert, I would stand upon the terrace of the palace. The torches along the river flickered like small suns, and the air was heavy with the scent of lotus and cool stone. Sometimes I thought of my father and his laughter, of my mother and her silence, and wondered whether they could see what their daughter had become. But power, my listener, is never still. It hums beneath the skin, restless as the wind before a storm. And with it comes a loneliness so vast it could swallow the sky. I kept the boy close. He sat beside me in the halls of judgment, his small hands folded, his gaze drifting from the scrolls to the floor. I tried to teach him the patience of rivers, the wisdom of listening before speaking, but he was young, and the fire of his lineage burned too hot. Once he said to me, "You rule as though you were Pharaoh, mother." And I smiled gently. I rule as one who serves Egypt." He frowned, puzzled, not yet old enough to hear the meaning beneath the words. Years flowed like water. The boy grew into youth, but Egypt had already learned to know my face, my voice, my command. When ambassadors arrived from the north, it was I who greeted them. When the builders sought permission to raise temples, it was I who signed the papyrus. When the Nile flooded too high or too low, it was my prayers that the priests chanted to calm the gods. The courtiers began to call me Nechteret, the female king divine. At first it was whispered with confusion, then with reverence. The more they spoke it, the more it became truth. Still, I treaded carefully. I did not wear the royal crown. I did not sit upon the golden throne. Not yet. Instead, I ruled from its shadow, unseen yet undeniable. In those days, my dreams became heavy with symbols. I saw myself standing between two suns, one rising, one setting, and both turned their faces toward me. I dreamt of the falcon again, soaring over a river of light, and in the dream, a voice said, "You cannot hide forever in the half-light. The world awaits your dawn." When I awoke, I felt the truth of it burn within me like the heat of Ra. It was time to step from the shadow of regency into the full light of kingship, not as usurper, but as vessel of Maat, of harmony, of divine order. And so I began to prepare. I summoned the high priests and ordered new offerings to Amun. I commanded the carving of reliefs, showing my lineage not merely as queen, but as child of the god himself. The sculptors shaped my face into the likeness of Pharaoh, serene, unbroken, eternal. At first, they hesitated. "But, Majesty," they said, "it is not our way to show a woman with the beard of kings." I looked at them steadily, my voice soft but firm. "Then let our way be changed." The first image of me as Pharaoh was unveiled beneath the morning sun. I stood before it, my face carved in stone, my body robed in the form of kings, and I felt no shame. It was as though I had stepped into a truth that had waited for me all along. I was not disguising my womanhood. I was sanctifying it. For I had come to understand that divinity is neither male nor female. It is the balance of both, the stillness between opposites, the breath that gives life to the world. When I appeared before the people, wearing the royal headdress and the Uraeus serpent upon my brow, they knelt, uncertain at first, then willingly, joyfully. The air trembled with the sound of their voices. Ang, Udja, Seneb. Long live Hatshepsut, king of Upper and Lower Egypt. That night, as I stood before the shrine of Amun, the torches flickering low, I whispered into the darkness, "I have done as you willed, Father. The daughter has become your living son." And the wind rose through the temple, soft and full of warmth, as if the god himself exhaled his blessing across the stone. From that night forward, I was no longer regent. I was Pharaoh, not by force, not by decree, but by the quiet inevitability of truth. And Egypt, my listener, breathed in peace. The Nile flowed in rhythm, the temples sang, and the stars above Thebes burned with a steadier light. Yet even in triumph I knew, every crown is a circle, and circles always turn. You are still with me, my listener, aren't you? Then follow me up the western cliffs of Thebes, where dawn spreads her golden arms across the valley and the stone breathes in the first light of day. It is here, upon these ancient cliffs, that I chose to build my heart in stone. They call it Jezer Jezeru, the Holy of Holies. But to me, it was more than temple, more than monument. It was breath turned to architecture, prayer turned to earth. It was my promise to eternity. When I first stood before this place, the desert wind still wild and untouched, the cliffs rose behind me like sleeping giants. The rocks glowed faintly red in the morning sun, and I felt the eyes of Amun upon me. He said, softly as wind in papyrus, "Make for me a dwelling that will outlast even your name." And I answered, "I will make a dwelling not for me, but for your light." The architects bowed deeply, waiting for my command. I told them, "Do not build as mortals build. Carve as the gods dream. Let each terrace rise like the steps of the sun. Let the cliffs embrace it as the earth embraces her child." And so it began the work of years, the rhythm of eternity captured in hammer and chisel. From the quarries of the desert they brought stone white as moonlight, warm as bone. Thousands of men labored under the sun. Their voices rose in chants that echoed through the valley. The sound was not noise but music, a great, slow heartbeat that joined the living with the dead. When I walked among them, they would fall silent and bow their heads. Their foreheads glistened with dust and sweat, and the smell of limestone filled the air, sharp, clean, eternal. I spoke to them gently, for I had no wish to be feared. "What we build here," I said, "will speak to the sky long after our words are dust. Let your hands be steady, your hearts pure." And they would nod, murmuring, "May Amun guide the hand of Pharaoh." As the terraces rose, I spent my days between the palace and the cliffs. At dusk, when the sun sank behind the western hills, I would sit upon the upper platform and watch the shadows stretch like long blue fingers across the valley. The air would cool, and the scent of crushed stone and resin would mix with the faint perfume of acacia trees from the riverbanks below. Sometimes the workers sang as they walked home soft, rhythmic songs that carried on the wind, songs of the river, of mothers and children, of home. And I would listen, my heart both heavy and light. Inside the temple, I ordered that every wall tell a story. There, I would be carved not as a woman, nor as a man, but as Pharaoh, the living Ma'at, scenes of my birth, touched by the hand of Amun, scenes of my coronation beneath the gaze of the gods, and the great voyage to the Land of Punt, where incense trees grew in golden soil. The painters worked with pigments ground from lapis, ochre, and malachite. The colors glowed beneath a torchlight blue like the heavens, red like the life force of Ra, gold like divine breath. When I walked through the halls at night, the paintings seemed to move, the gods stepping down from the walls to walk beside me. One evening, I found Sinemut, my chief architect, my most trusted soul, standing before a half-finished column. The lamplight trembled on his face. His eyes were distant, full of thought. "Pharaoh," he said softly, "no hand has ever built such a place. Why do you labor so for eternity, when eternity already knows your name?" I smiled. "Because memory is fragile, Senenmut. Even a god's whisper can fade if it is not given a form. This temple will be my voice when the sands forget my breath." He bowed his head, and for a moment we stood together in silence, the wind humming through the pillars like a living harp. Days turned to months, months to years. Each morning I climbed the terraces as the sun rose. And each morning the temple stood a little higher, a little closer to the sky. When at last it was complete, I stood before it, the cliffs glowing red behind me, the world washed in gold. The people gathered below, thousands upon thousands, their voices rising like waves. Priests carried offerings of honey, flowers and oil. The scent of incense filled the air. When I stepped forward, a hush fell. I raised my hands to the heavens and said, Amun, hidden one, you gave me life and breath. I return them to you in stone and song. May this place stand as long as your light warms the earth. And in that instant, a wind swept down the valley, warm, gentle, full of dust and light. It wrapped around me like an embrace. The torches flickered, the banners lifted, and every heart in the crowd seemed to pause. It was as though Amun himself had exhaled upon the world. From that day onward, the temple was alive. When the morning sun touched its columns, the stone glowed with colour. When night fell, the stars hung above it like jewels scattered by the gods. Pilgrims came from across the two lands, peasants, priests, nobles, and children, each one climbing the terraces to stand in the stillness and feel the breath of eternity. I often wandered its corridors alone, my steps echoing softly. The air was cool, smelling faintly of incense and stone. Sometimes I would place my hand upon the wall and feel the faint warmth of life still pulsing within it. And I would think, this is what immortality feels like, not thunder, but quiet. Once, as twilight fell, I climbed to the highest terrace. The desert stretched out before me, endless, golden, vast. The wind lifted my linen robe and carried it behind me like a sail. The last light of Ra touched the horizon, and the cliffs around me blazed red and gold. I closed my eyes, and for a heartbeat, I felt myself dissolve into the air, neither queen nor mortal, but part of the sky itself. And the voice came again, the same voice that had spoken to me since I was a child by the Nile. You have done as I asked. My daughter, you have given form to faith. Tears welled in my eyes. And yet, Father, I whispered, I am still afraid of time. The wind answered, soft as breath. Then build not for time, but for truth. Time fades. Truth endures. I looked down at the terraces below me, stone upon stone, light upon light, and I realized that truth was already there, not in the walls, but in the will that raised them. Do you see it too, my listener? Even now, when the centuries have passed and the sands have shifted, my temple still stands, rising out of the cliffs like a memory that refuses to die. When you look upon it, you are looking upon my soul. And if you listen closely, in the hush of the desert wind, you may still hear the hammer's song, the prayers of the builders, and my whisper, I am still here. Well, do you hear it again, my listener? That thin, persistent rustle in the dark, not the wind this time, but time itself, unfolding its wings. Even a falcon cannot circle the same sun forever. For years I ruled in brightness. Egypt breathed evenly. The granaries were full. The caravans returned, shimmering with lapis, incense, and cedar. Children learned to speak my name before they learned to shape their prayers. In the marketplaces of Thebes, the air tasted of dust and figs and honey, and the sound of my cartouche being carved was as common as the tinkling of bells. And yet, within the cool silence of the palace, I felt another rhythm beginning faint at first, then steady, then inevitable. It was the pace of footfalls I could not see, a presence gathering like dusk behind the pillars. Tutmos! He was no longer the boy who stared at the floor while scribes spoke. He had grown lean and flint-bright, like a blade kept in shadow. When he stood beside me in the great courts, he bore himself with a soldier's stillness. His eyes were a deep falcon brown, sharpened by lessons I had once tried to give him gently, and that the world now hammered into him without mercy. The generals loved him not for tenderness, but for certainty. He listened to their plans with the grave patience of a man who already imagines the weight of armor on his shoulders. If he looked toward me, it was with the wary respect reserved for mountains. Admired, unavoidable, and blocking a view of the horizon. One evening, I found him on the river terrace as the sun slid down the western cliffs. The Nile was a long copper thread. The palms had darkened to black lace against the sky. "You walk late," I said. He did not turn. "I walk to remember. The river keeps counsel better than men." We stood for a time in that shared silence. Crickets stitched the dusk together. In the distance, a boat slid past a lamp burning at its prow, like a star fallen into water. "You have kept Egypt," he said at last. "It is a thing difficult to praise, because it seems simple to those who have not tried." The words were both compliment and challenge. I bowed my head. "To keep is the rarest art, rarer than conquest." His jaw settled, as if deciding the shape of years to come. "Then perhaps it is time I learn the other art, and together they may be whole." He left before I could answer. The lamp on the water moved away until it was only a thought, and the falcon inside my chest shifted its wings. I began to wake before dawn, with a weight in my bones that was not sickness and not sorrow, only the heaviness of arrival. The body knows what the heart refuses to name. In my mirror of polished bronze, I saw the same face carved on temple walls, yet under the gilt of calm another truth had bloomed, the slight hollows at the temples, the deeper silence behind the eyes. I did not fear it. I had stood too often in the hush of sanctuaries to fear stillness. But I felt the geometry of the court changing around me. Conversations tightened when I entered. Scribes angled their bodies almost imperceptibly toward the door through which Thutmose would come. The high priest bowed at the same degree. Yes, yet the breath he drew after rising belonged to another dawn. Senenmut watched with a quiet I had never seen in him. We spoke one afternoon beneath the half-shadow of a colonnade where the stone was cool and tasted faintly of salt. "Majesty," he said, "I have begun designs for a small shrine within the inner garden, a place of breath, not proclamation." "For me?" I asked. He smiled in the way of a man who refuses to make sentences heavy. "For the one who taught me how to measure light." I touched the pillar beside us. It held the day like a memory. "Build it with no threshold," I said, "so that air itself is the door." He inclined his head. We both pretended not to hear the distant tramp of soldiers training in the eastern court. The festivals continued. I wore the crowns. I poured libations. I sang the hymns whose words had become my heartbeat. In the great courts of Karnak, the incense hung like milk in the air, and the morning sun reached down in its narrow shafts to touch the crowns of the gods. As I lifted my hands, a tremor passed through me, not from weakness, but from recognition. I was standing within the shape of an ending. That night, I dreamt I climbed my temple's terraces, but they did not rise. Instead, they unfolded downward into the earth, step by step, into coolness and quiet. At the bottom was not darkness, but a pool that held the stars perfectly still, as if the sky were resting in a cup of stone. A voice, the same wind-smooth voice that had named me daughter, said, "Eternity is not height, child, it is depth." I woke at peace and at once afraid. Peace, because I understood, afraid, because every understanding is a gate that cannot be closed again. Thutmose took the armies east for a season, a small campaign, they said, a matter of tribute and boundary stones. When he returned, the city greeted him with a cheer that even the river answered. He did not boast, he did not need to. Victory, when it has a home in a man, walks with him like a shadow. He came to me in the audience hall, where the painted lilies were as bright as if morning had just been invented. Egypt is safe, he said. Then let us keep her so, I replied. He studied me for a long breath. Keeping is a discipline. I have learned to love it. But sometimes the gods ask for a different offering. Do they? I asked, though I did not need the answer. They do. His eyes softened and hardened. I am ready to be the one who answers. The hall sounded suddenly enormous, a shell of stone listening to two small creatures arrange a world. I smiled, and in that smile placed all the tenderness I could make without letting it become permission. Then answer, Thutmose. Answer in the way that keeps Egypt closest to her own heart. He bowed, and power, not a thunderclap, not a blow shifted like a tide turning between two breaths. There are many kinds of erasure, my listener. The most merciful is forgetting. The most cruel is remembering wrongly. Somewhere in the long corridors of the palace, decisions were made with blades instead of voices. One morning, a workman arrived at a wall to find my face newly chipped, not gone, only wounded. A nose vanished here, a name thinned there. Another day, a scribe copied a list of kings and left a space where my cartouche should have curled like a river bud. I did not rave. Stone endures. Stone is also patient, with the small teeth of envy. I walked to the river instead. It was late afternoon. The light was old gold. The water smelled of silt and figs and shadow. Great Father, I said to the current, am I to be unmade? The reed spoke. The heron spoke. The river answered in the only way it knows, by continuing. In that answer was mercy enough. When the news reached me that a relief at Deir el-Bahari had been struck, I went alone at dusk. The cliffs held the day's heat. The terraces held the hush of 1,000 footsteps now gone. I found the scar fresh, pale, obscenely bright in lamplight, where my profile had once kept conversation with eternity. I pressed my palm to the wound in the stone and felt a faint warmth lingering there, like the ghost of the sun. Be patient, I whispered to the wall. He is young. All blades are, until they learn what they cannot cut. The wind moved through the colonnade. It smelled of limestone and beeswax and a sweetness I could not name. Illness arrived as a courtesy, quietly, with good manners. A small failing in the morning, a softness in the knees at noon, an extra breath needed to finish a prayer. My physicians came with bowls that smelled of fenugreek and honey and earth. They spoke in the soothing future tense of men who wish to distract a queen from arithmetic. I began to sit more often. From a chair in the northern garden, I watched the light sift through fig leaves and scatter upon the paving like broken green coins. Servants' children played at the pool's edge, chasing dragonflies. Their laughter had the shape of my first years. A cat slept beside the reed jar, one paw touching the jar's shadow as if to anchor it. Senenmut brought me a drawing of the thresholdless shrine. It was a rectangle of shade within shade. No door, only the invitation of coolness. I traced the planned cornice with a fingertip. Build it, I said, and place nothing within. Nothing? He asked. Air, I said, and the sound of leaves. He bowed, and we both pretended this was about architecture. On the last night I stood as Pharaoh before the shrine of Amun. The torches burned low and steady, their light the colour of wild honey. The priests' voices rose and fell like the breath of a sleeping god. I lifted the offering bowl and felt its weight as if it were the weight of Egypt itself. Not heavy, exactly, but exact, the measure by which a soul is judged. Father, I said within the silence beyond words, I have kept your order as far as a mortal may. I have built truth in stone and tried to keep my hands clean. If there is any stain, let it be mine alone. It is not thunder that answers such things. It is the smallest breeze, the almost not there stir that lifts the edge of a veil. It touched my cheek, and somewhere a lamp flared without oil. I understood. I summoned Thutmose at dawn. The sky was a pale blue raft, a single ibis passed, its wings a sentence writing itself and already complete. He came armoured in nothing but mourning. Sit, I said. He remained standing the courtesy of a young king to the old one who made him possible. You will take the ceremonies, I told him. The judgments, the signatures, the noise, keep the quiet for yourself. It is the only part of rule that cannot be taught. His mouth-tightened grief looks like anger when it must stand in a room with gratitude. I have not asked for your shadow to be diminished, he said. Shadows are not diminished, I answered. They move. Follow the sun and you will understand. He bowed deep, clean, without theatre. In that moment I loved him as one loves a thing that will outlive and undo them both. And then, because every story must decide where to stop saying and then, the days gentled into the shape of an ending. I slept more. When I woke, I asked to be carried to the terrace where the wind knows my name. The city made its small mammals of sound. Pestles, sandals, distant songs. I thought of the first time the river said, I see you. I thought of the lily-painted ceiling above my childhood bed, and of my mother's hands smelling of frankincense, and of my father calling me little hawk. I thought of the workmen's chants at the temple rising like steps into light. I thought of Thutmose's lamp on the water, moving away without malice. Do you know this, my listener? How the mind at the end is a careful archivist, laying each bright shard beside the next until it makes a picture you can live inside forever? I felt no fear, only the courtesy of departure. The room darkened slightly, though the lamp did not change. The air thinned and widened. I heard a sound like linen folding itself, and the voice older than the first name of the first star said, Enough, daughter. Depth has welcomed height. Come. I smiled, not because I was brave, but because I was expected. If they scraped my name from stone, the wind kept it. If they chipped my face from relief, the river remembered the angle of my cheek. If lists forgot me, children playing at the pool taught each other to walk along the edge without falling, and in that balance was my cartouche, uncarved and perfect. So when you stand before my terraces, and the afternoon lays its long gold upon their steps, listen. If you hear only silence, you are hearing me correctly. Silence is my final architecture. It is what I built in the shape of a nation and what I leave in the shape of a breath. I am Hatshepsut, daughter of Amun, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the falcon who learned to land. I am still here, in the hush that keeps the world from falling apart. My listener, the Nile, has always whispered of distant things, of lands where the air smells of rain instead of sand, where the trees bleed perfume, and where gods take shapes the priests of Thebes have never imagined. It was in the fullness of my reign, when peace covered Egypt like silk, that I heard the river's call most clearly. Each morning, as I stood upon the terrace of my temple, I would watch the ships rocking gently in the harbour, their sails catching the wind as easily as dreams catch sleep. One dawn, as the mist lifted from the water, I felt the presence of Amun around me, not as voice but as certainty. The reeds trembled, though no breeze touched them, and the sky, pale and endless, seemed to lean closer, and in that silence the thought arrived, as soft as the fall of lotus petals. Go, my daughter, bring me the scent of the divine from the ends of the earth. The council murmured when I told them. Voyages were for merchants, for men with salt in their skin, not for the will of Pharaoh. But I smiled. The gods themselves have asked for this journey, I said. Who are we to deny the horizon? And so the preparations began. The shipyards awoke before dawn. Carpenters struck wood with mallets whose rhythm was like the beating of the heart. Resin boiled in bronze pots, ropes coiled like sleeping serpents. The hulls were shaped of cedar from Lebanon, smooth, gleaming, scented of sun and salt. When I walked among the workers, the air shimmered with sound and smoke. We build for Amun, they said, and each plank seemed to carry a prayer. 5 ships were readied, their prows carved into the shapes of falcons and lions, their sails dyed in ochre and cream. I watched them from the riverbank as they were blessed, priests chanting, incense rising, the water glittering like bronze beneath the sun. The whole of Thebes gathered to see. Children clung to their mothers' linen robes, old men shaded their eyes, and the sound of flutes filled the air like birds returning home. As the flagship slipped from the harbour, I lifted my hand toward the crowd, and the people bowed. Pharaoh sails for the gods, they cried. But in my heart I whispered, Pharaoh sails for the soul of Egypt. The river widened. The colour of its banks darkened to bronze. Days passed in rhythm, the splash of oars, the creak of rope, the whisper of wind through sails. At night we camped along the banks, the air warm and rich with the smell of mud and fire. The stars here were closer than in Thebes. They hung heavy, mirrored in the river like jewels scattered by divine hands. I often lay awake, listening to the soft groan of the boats and the distant call of water birds. Sometimes, in the small hours, I would feel him, Amun, the hidden one, not in words, but in presence, as though the night itself watched and approved. After many weeks, the Nile gave way to the sea, a great, restless expanse that smelled of eternity. The sailors bowed before it, murmuring old prayers. Even I felt my heart tremble at the sight. The horizon stretched so far that the sun seemed a mere coin tossed upon it. The Red Sea was not gentle. Its waves rolled dark and green, their crests foaming white like the hair of drowned gods. The ships rocked, groaned, sighed, but the men sang as they worked low, rhythmic songs that rose and fell with the tide. Their voices were rough, but beneath them I heard the same music that had built my temple. The human will made rhythm. I would stand upon the prow, the wind tugging at my robe, and I would think, is this what freedom feels like? To belong to the sky and the sea and to nothing else? There was a night when the sea grew calm as glass. The stars burned brighter than ever before, so many that the water seemed a mirror of heaven. The men slept, exhausted, and I stood alone, feeling the ship breathe beneath my feet. I whispered to the sea, "Do you know me, great mother of depths?" And the sea answered in ripples that lapped the hull. All who sail me return changed. After weeks that felt like years, the color of the horizon shifted. A deep green line, then the faint scent of unknown flowers carried by wind. "Punt!" the captain said, his voice trembling. The land rose from the mist, hills clothed in trees, unlike any in Egypt, their bark glistening with resin, their leaves broad and trembling in the humid air. Strange birds called from the canopy, their cries sharp and musical. The air was thick, sweet, alive. It smelled of rain and myrrh and the breath of new worlds. The people of Punt came to greet us, skin dark and luminous in the sun, adorned with gold and shells, their laughter full and unafraid. They led me to their queen, a woman of broad grace, her eyes clever as the river's edge. She greeted me not as a supplicant, but as an equal. "Pharaoh of the two lands," she said, "you have sailed far to meet the children of the south. Why do you seek what you already possess?" I smiled. "Because the gods love reflection. You hold in your trees what we hold in our hearts." She laughed, and her laughter was warm as the air around us. They showed me their incense trees, their goat, their monkeys and leopards. They gave me baskets of ebony and cinnamon, and jars filled with the fragrant sap the gods use for perfume. In return, I offered them beads of turquoise, linen white as cloud, and an image of Amun cast in gold. When I placed it in her hands, the queen bowed her head, and for a moment the wind stilled, as though even the sea was listening. That evening, we feasted beside the water. The drums beat slow and deep. The air was filled with music and firelight. I remember the taste of roasted fruit, the shimmer of moonlight on the women's skin as they danced. I remember thinking that perhaps heaven was not above us, but between people who meet in peace. Before dawn, I climbed a small hill overlooking the harbour. The world was silver with mist. Below, the ships waited, their sails furled, their decks laden with gifts. The trees glistened in the early light, each one heavy with resin, the tears of the gods. And I whispered, "Amun, I have brought you the scent of your hidden home." A single drop of resin fell from a branch and struck the earth at my feet. It glowed briefly, like an ember, and then went dark. And I knew the god had answered. The return voyage was slower, heavy with gifts and reflection. The sailors spoke in softer tones now, as though the sea itself had taught them reverence. Each sunset turned the water to molten gold, and I would stand at the prow again, the wind in my hair, and think of the Queen of Punt and how her laughter still echoed in my heart. When at last we reached the Nile, the priests met us with incense and song. The people lined the banks, their voices rising in waves of joy. "Pharaoh has returned with the breath of the gods," they cried, and I, standing among them, felt both proud and humbled. For I understood that this journey was not only for Amun, but for myself. A voyage from certainty into wonder, from stone into water, from the known into the infinite. My listener, if you ever stand beside the sea and hear its endless voice, remember this: the gods live in the spaces between shores, and those who dare to cross them carry eternity in their hearts. Thebes lies quiet tonight, my listener. The moon drifts above the pylons of Karnak like a silver barque sailing through eternity. The city breathes in slow rhythm. The torches on the temple walls flicker like tired stars. And I, Hatshepsut, walk alone among the columns that once echoed with my name. Each step stirs a faint dust of incense, a ghost of sandalwood and stone. The pillars rise around me like a forest of frozen music, every one carved with prayers I once commanded to be sung. I run my fingers across the hieroglyphs. The lines are shallow now. The years have begun to soften even the language of the gods. How strange to feel peace where once I felt command. How light the crown seems when it no longer rests upon my brow. I come here each evening when the priests have finished their hymns and the tourists of time have left. The air cools, the granite grows blue. The great statue of Amun watches me from the darkness, his face both mercy and mystery. Sometimes I imagine he blinks. "Father," I whisper, "was it enough?" My voice sounds small in the vastness. Only the wind answers, a low sigh that moves through the colonnade, lifting the hem of my linen robe like a quiet blessing. I sit beside the sacred lake. Its surface is still, mirroring the stars with perfect obedience. When I drop a petal into the water, the reflection breaks, and in that trembling, I see the truth of all I built. Temples, thrones, even memory, all are ripples upon an endless pool, yet each one catches the light for a moment, and that too is divine. Behind me, the city murmurs faint music, the cry of a child, the bark of a dog. Life continues, unbothered by the names of kings, and I find comfort in that. For I was never meant to cage eternity, only to shape it for a time as one shapes sand before the tide return. Sometimes I dream of my temple at Deir el-Bahari. In the dream, it is always sunrise. The cliffs blush gold, the air smells of myrrh, and I am walking there again, barefoot, a girl with dust on her hands and a god's whisper in her heart. She turns to look at me, that younger self, and she smiles as if to say, "We did it." Yes, we did. I take a slow breath. The air tastes of stone and river, of endings and beginnings. The falcon within me no longer beats its wings. It rests, folded, patient, waiting for the dawn beyond dawn. "Great Amun," I say softly. I release it all, the crowns, the names, the weight of memory. Let Egypt be held in your light. Let my voice become part of the wind. The wind answers warm, tender, and for a heartbeat, the whole temple seems to breathe. If you ever walk here, my listener, between these silent columns, when the evening light turns them gold, pause, listen. The hush that touches your skin, that is me. The peace you feel, that is what remains. I am Hatshepsut, daughter of Amun. Not the queen, not the conqueror, the silence that endures. The wind over Thebes grows quiet now. The torches of the temple burn low, and the moon drifts beyond the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari. Her story has ended, yet her silence still lingers. In the breath of stone, in the shimmer of the Nile, and perhaps in you, if you felt her voice beside you tonight. If it brought you peace or wonder, stay for a while longer in the hush of this moment. And when you are ready, open your eyes, knowing that time passes, but beauty, true beauty endures. Good night, my listener. Sleep well, wherever you are in the world.